Magnetic center. Expanding further on the commentary of self-love, it has a broad base and a narrow apex, so could be represented as a triangle. The base of that triangle would be the extent of self-love. As it grows from its base into life and others, it narrows until becoming a point. In the examination of self-love, the triangle could represent rapidly narrowing interests that extend from a broader foundation of self-interests and self-love. In matters more distant from us, we grow less and less interested. We care little or nothing for anything far away, for other people, other countries, regions, and problems that don't impact us directly. Nor do we care about ideas of the world we cohabit, the cosmos, or anything as remote. What, we ask, what on earth has it got to do with me? Taking by illustration a similar triangle, but the other way up and superimposed. This symbol is ancient, and like many symbols it contains various layers of meaning. Gurdjieff pointed out that symbolism should act as a shock to our knowledge, then spoke of 4 kinds: Hebrew, Egyptian, Persian and Hindu or Yang. The symbol shared here belongs to Hebrew symbolism, and is called the Seal of Solomon, representing the interpenetration of 2 things, 2 media or principles of levels. Notice that one triangle ends as a mere point in the other, where apex and base meet, and that there is a diamond-shaped intermediate area, where both mingle, and 4 corner areas where there is no commingling of the 2. If one triangle were to be cut of blue glass, and the other of yellow, there would be 2 blue and 2 yellow triangles with a middle green area where colors mingle. Suppose then that the blue triangle with its breadth above and its apical point below, represents some principle that runs counter to that of the yellow triangle of self-love, whose breadth is below and pinnacle lies above. Reflect on the symbolism representing a universal interpenetration of some lower, by a higher principle in everything, save at the cosmic level of the moon. Recognize that there are 2 orders, principles, forces, or influences acting upon life, which is the characteristic feature of magnetic center, the duality of yin and yang. Remember too that magnetic center is that discerning power within us, capable of distinguishing between A and B influences. We need not review previous commentaries here, but suffice to state that A influences are created through life, and obviously have connection with self-love, the love of power, possessions, physical presence, subjectivity, and so on. However, there also exist unusual, and perhaps inexplicable B influences, curious sides to history and strange examples of things that have no connection with commerce, industry, and subjective positivism. The mystical which survives our cultures, having clearly no connection with petty self-interest and representing the visible expression of some other influences that are felt and manifest through those who possess magnetic center. Translated through the arts into architecture, painting, poetry, literature, sculpture, music, theatre, dance, sainthood, teaching, chivalry, and so on. Acts that are unconnected with immediate personal gain or advantage. Deprived of this wonderful wave of force, an extraordinary luminance that has been transmitted in 1,000 ways throughout the ages, we would remain nothing but barbarians inhabiting the dark ages, having no idea of anything beyond self-love, its avarice and narrow confines. It is true to say that someone might recognize all this theoretically without seeing their own condition, situation, and path. An objective of self-observation is to become aware of our motives, motivation, and chief feature or signature, which is not a simple process. So ask yourself sometimes, why am I doing this? Why am I saying this? Why am I behaving in this manner? Why am I writing this? Where is all of this going? Whatever imaginary cloak of self-righteousness we clothe ourselves in, these questions tend to undress us again. In this regard, we need to accept that this work is merciless and cannot be denied. People imagine they can pretend, however it is impossible, and only what is real can remain. When we have journeyed deeply enough into self-observation and self-knowledge, we simply have to give up a great many of the manifestations of self-love, disguised as something genuine. Remember what is said of the work in the book of Revelation, all the churches shall know that I am he that searcheth the reins and hearts, and I will give unto each one of you according to your works. See Revelations, chapter 2, verse 23. The objective of this work is obviously to separate us from what is false. Gurdjieff warned those who attended his institute in France that personality here has almost no right to exist. However, the more self-love we possess, the less this can happen. What a long journey it is, yet a very real one which undoubtedly exists. It is no invention. Esoteric teaching is not an imaginary thing and represents the most real in this world, more real than a lottery check, more real than a house, more real than another person. Hence we are speaking here of a deeper honesty to oneself, a deeper sincerity that has nothing to do with the requirements of everyday life. A deeper sense of life is necessary, one that can eventually grasp the three lines of work. Work for and on oneself, work with and for the sake of others, then work in and for the work itself. Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Returning then to the upper blue triangle which is upside down and penetrates the yellow triangle of self-love, representing life. If we are convinced that this life is all that there is, if we take our meanings from that, thinking only in terms of it, then there is no upper triangle at work in us. We have discussed meaning previously, how a visible object is one thing and its meaning another. How if one cannot see this, there can be no inner work of separation and transformation. We can transform life only through new meaning, we cannot transform people and things whose entire existence is revealed to us only through our senses. We possess inner sense for a reason. Our mind is the first transformer, where thinking in a new way, our attitudes change, and so the meaning of this world changes. However, to think in a new way, we must receive and accept new knowledge or new ideas. It's that simple, but enormous difficulties arise in us before we can do so, hence rendering transition more difficult. We are fixated, so identified with our opinions and crystallized around them, making this a tremendous labor. Recall the allegory and parable of the labors of Hercules. One of his tasks was to cleanse the Augean stables, which were full of dung. What is dung in the meaning of parables? All our negative emotions, all our petty viewpoints, personal values, self-love, and so on. Hercules diverted a river to cleanse the stables and wash the horses of the mind. Water means truth and horses mean power in the language of parables. This work teaches truth. Truth about which ways, what ideas, what effort is necessary for that change of being that all of us secretly long for in the recess of our innermost selves. This means that esoteric truth and esoteric knowledge can cleanse us from that continual, inadequate, uneasy, and half-guilty feeling that most people possess in their everyday lives. A normal person in this work means someone with magnetic center. Normal being, the level of a layperson means just that. If we are content with ourselves, then it is far better to remain so. This work can only upset us and disturb that status quo. Which is one of the difficulties that has to be considered with regard to other people. A good householder in the ordinary sense of the word is someone who does their job adequately and with decency. However, in the strictest work sense, they are a person who does their job without believing it leads anywhere, and yet sees their responsibilities, and so fulfills them. They have not yet acquired magnetic center, but are close to it. These individuals perform their duties and see that they need to, realizing vaguely that it leads nowhere, but do not as yet realize that there is something else. They do not deny there is anything else, but have no idea what it might be. This way, the way of good householder, is a definite line of ascending being through recurrence, only we are told it is a very long path. There is no sense of an upper triangle, only a dissatisfaction with the lower, however this is at least genuine. It is infinitely better than pretending, from hearsay, from pseudo-attitudes and mimicry that one knows about the upper triangle, when actually they are dressed up in the clothes and ribbons of the lower triangle. The most terrible crime in this work is pretending, because it means a lack of sincerity, and the work is based upon sincerity. So if you lack a deep and sincere relation to the work itself, from yourself, then great danger may result if you fake it. This is why it is important to think of people whom you wish to touch with this work. It is a live wire, a million-volt circuit, speaking ultimately. Not in its introductory stages, however. Gurdjieff asked his students, "Why are you here?" This made everyone consider their participation. Could we say to ourselves deeply that we are here in order not to lose touch with the work, or is it simply vanity, the lower triangle, or what else? It is certainly not financial advantage. We can find many things in ourselves that are spurious. This is an example of a shock given at a certain moment in its rightful context. Speaking of the upper triangle, which is the reverse of the lower in principle, in motive, direction, feeling, thought, attitude and aim. This upper triangle represents the work. It is the influences emanating from the level of the sun psychologically, the level of the conscious circle of humanity which to us seems vague and often very faint or indistinct. Reflect for a moment, considering whether it changes people. The upper triangle is esotericism. It is thinking in an utterly different way, with new meaning, new ways of taking everything that happens on this planet, with all its recurring events as we experience them through our senses. It is an atmosphere, fitted over the earth of ourselves, the world as we know it. Demanding devotion quite different from self-love. It is in fact against the very idea of oneself, and demands a struggle with that thing we now call ourselves. It seeks to initiate that struggle in each of us. Every idea of the work, of esoteric teaching of the Old and the New Testaments, as well as a vast number of other sources and fragments of ancient teaching, are about just this. They always go against self-love and should not make us feel more comfortable. On the contrary, they should make us uneasy at first, and then definitely uncomfortable inwardly, but with direction. All this goes against the complacency of self-love. Of that person we imagine that we are and project, but are not. Of this brittle masquerade of ourselves. If we never apply the work, if we never observe ourselves through the teaching, if we never judge ourselves from its perspective, then we shall remain just as we are. A spark is necessary to ignite the flame that becomes the phoenix, reborn of fire in the second baptism. It is necessary to see that we are in the presence of something real, something finely crafted and gentle, something delicate and beautiful. When new emotions begin, they catch and transmit the work. They are caused by thoughts and private reflections on esotericism. If you don't truly need this work, then nothing really will or can happen to you. How could it? How many people really need the work? So ask yourself, why are you here? Recall what is said in Hebrews. For the word is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing even to the dividing of soul and spirit, of both joints and marrow, and quick to discern the thoughts and intents of the heart. There are no creatures that are not manifest in its sight, but all things are naked and laid open before the eyes of that with whom we have to deal. See Hebrews, chapter 4, verses 12 and 13. These two triangles in reverse, the Hebrew symbol called Seal of Solomon, belonging to the esoteric and not the literal side of Hebraism, transmit to us a teaching that there is always an upper level, acting upon the lower. But that does not imply that the lower receives it. The same idea is contained in the work where it says that higher centers are fully developed and constantly working, however our lower centers cannot catch their meaning. If we could at any moment cease to identify with ourselves, cease to follow the influences of the lower triangle, then we might receive influences from an upper triangle, but for the longest time we are unable to understand them. The entirely new thoughts and new feelings are not recognized, or they seem mere nonsense and babble. When someone has magnetic center, when their level of being is characterized by this fact, they already have some sense of the triangle. But if they are entirely immersed and identified with the lower triangle, with everything belonging to self-love, self-interest, everything of the senses, everything literal, then they are blissfully unaware of any upper triangle and seek to interpret life in terms of itself. For them, there is nothing but this moment.